She kissed a complete stranger to survive. He kissed her back because he owed a dead man a debt he could never repay. And neither of them knew it yet. 4 months from now, Elena Marchetti will sit in a federal interrogation room, 7 months pregnant, hands cuffed to the table, while an FBI agent asks her a simple question. Did you know who Dominic Valenti was when you kissed him? And she will answer with the only truth she has left. I thought he would save me. I did not know he was the reason my father died. But that is 4 months from now. Tonight she is 24 years old, wearing a black dress that hides the bruises on her arms, standing in a ballroom full of people who cannot help her, watching the man who put those bruises there walk toward her with murder in his eyes. And across the room, a 47-year-old former Green Beret with a tremor in his left hand and blood on his conscience is about to become the most important person in her life and the most dangerous. This is how it started. Dominic Valenti counted 4 exits before he finished his first glass of water. That was the thing about 20 years in Special Forces. The battlefield never really ended. You just traded sand for marble, body armor for a tailored suit, the crack of incoming rounds for the clink of champagne flutes. But the instinct lived in the base of your skull like a second pulse. Every room was a kill zone. Every crowd concealed a potential ambush. Every door was either an escape route or a fatal funnel, and you had better know which before you needed it. He stood near the bar at the Palmer House in downtown Chicago, scanning the charity gala the way he once scanned mountain ridgelines in Helmand Province. Water glass in hand, no alcohol, never alcohol. He had watched too many brothers from the old unit crawl into bottles after coming home, and he had promised himself he would not join them. Not because he was stronger, because he was terrified of what he might become without control. The ballroom was everything money could buy. Crystal chandeliers throwing fractured light across 300 black ties and evening gowns. An orchestra playing something European and forgettable. Waiters gliding like ghosts with silver trays. The air thick with perfume, old money, and the particular desperation of wealthy people performing generosity for an audience. On paper, Dominic belonged here. A chain of Italian restaurants across the South Side. A logistics company moving freight through the Great Lakes. Real estate in Pilsen and Bridgeport. Clean taxes, 200 employees. The kind of portfolio that earned invitations to galas and handshakes with aldermen. Beneath the paper, the picture was different. The restaurants laundered more than linens. The logistics company moved more than freight. The real estate was purchased with money that had traveled through enough shell corporations to forget its own birthday. He had built his empire the way his instructors at Fort Bragg taught him to build a concealed position. Invisible from the outside, lethal from within. He was not proud of it. People saw the penthouse, the armored SUV, the men who moved when he moved, and assumed he loved the life. They were wrong. But he was not going to pretend he was a victim of circumstance either. That was a lie he had told himself for years, and he had stopped believing it. The truth was uglier and simpler. When he came home from his 4th deployment, 20 years of service behind him, a Bronze Star and 2 Purple Hearts in a drawer he never opened, 3 dead teammates from ODA, 5131 living rent-free in his nightmares. The country he had fought for handed him a plastic chair at the VA, a 30-minute appointment, and a bottle of pills that made the screaming stop, but made everything else stop too. Job applications went nowhere. His lease expired. His girl left. His buddy Paulson, a staff sergeant who had survived 4 firefights in the Tangi Valley, put a pistol in his mouth on a Tuesday afternoon in a studio apartment in Cicero. Dominic found the body, cleaned the wall before the police came, sat in his truck in the parking lot for 2 hours, hands on the steering wheel, staring at nothing. 3 weeks later, Vincent Corsetti found him. The old crime boss recognized what Dominic was the way one predator recognizes another. Offered him work. Security consulting, he called it. Dominic knew exactly what it was. He took it anyway. Not because he had no choice. He had choices. The VA, a warehouse job, shelf stocking at the hardware store on Archer Avenue. But the underworld gave him what civilian life could not. A mission. Men who followed orders. The clarity of a structure where loyalty meant something and consequences were immediate. For a man whose nervous system had been rewired by 2 decades of combat, there was a terrible comfort in that clarity. So he built, year after year, took over when Vincent retired, expanded, made alliances with men whose names went unspoken in certain neighborhoods, and the former Master Sergeant of ODA 5131, the Green Beret who had served his country with distinction, became the man who ran the South Side from the shadows. People called him a crime boss. He did not argue with them. But there were things he carried that the power could not erase. The tremor in his left hand every morning, legacy of shrapnel from the Tangi Valley that shredded his forearm and killed 3 of his brothers. He hid it by gripping something solid: coffee mug, door frame, sink edge, and the photograph on his shelf at home. 6 men in desert camouflage, arms around shoulders, Afghan mountains behind them. 3 faces marked with small black crosses in careful pen. He was about to leave the gala when he saw Ryan Cole. The name triggered an immediate file in his memory. Cole, Ryan J., 28, real estate agent. Gambling debts totaling $180,000 accumulated at underground card games connected to the Corsetti family. Dominic's organization had acquired the debt 2 months prior. 3 payment extensions granted. 0 progress. Standard procedure for delinquent accounts was surveillance. What came back on Cole was not standard. The report showed Cole lived with a woman, Elena Marchetti, 24, graphic designer. The surveillance team noted she rarely left the apartment alone, that she wore long sleeves in August, that on 2 occasions she had visible bruising on her arms and neck, that neighbors had called police once. No charges. She told officers she had fallen. Dominic had read those reports at 3 a.m. on his terrace, city lights blurring below, and something cracked open in his chest that he had spent 10 years sealing shut. He knew that look, not from Chicago, from Helmand Province, from a compound outside Kandahar where his ODA found 3 women locked in a basement by men who confused dominion with strength. He had carried one of those women to the medevac helicopter himself. She was 20, and she weighed nothing because terror had consumed everything else. He had done terrible things since leaving the service. Destroyed an innocent man's laundry business on the South Side because the owner refused protection payments. Watched that man lose his shop, his home, his family, and told himself it was business. He had sins enough for 3 lifetimes, but one line survived every compromise. You do not put your hands on someone who cannot fight back. So when he saw Cole across the ballroom, fingers wrapped around the arm of a young woman whose shoulders curled inward with every touch, Dominic felt the old machinery engage, not rage, something colder and more precise, the operational clarity that settled over him before every mission brief. He had already been planning to intervene. His people had drafted options, a conversation with Cole, renegotiated debt with conditions, a restraining order through a retained attorney. But Elena Marchetti made her own plan first. Cole was pulling her toward the exit, drinking too much, hands too rough, voice a blade pressed against her ear. Dominic watched the woman's face cycle through emotions he recognized from a career spent studying human beings under extreme stress. Fear, calculation, and then something else. The wild clarity that comes when every option has been exhausted except one. She ripped free from Cole's grip, turned, scanned the room with the frantic precision of someone searching for a weapon or a shield or a miracle. Her eyes landed on Dominic. She walked straight to him. The room contracted, sound dimmed, orchestra, laughter, crystal, all dropping to a murmur as this woman he had surveilled but never met crossed 30 feet of marble with terror in her stride and something fiercer underneath it. She reached him, placed her palm flat against his chest. He felt the tremor in her fingers through the fabric of his shirt, felt the desperate pressure of a human being reaching for the only solid thing in a collapsing world. She kissed him, not with passion, with survival, the way a drowning person seizes driftwood, blind and absolute, staking everything on the chance that this man, this figure everyone whispered about and no one approached, might be the wall between her and the man closing distance behind her. His training engaged before his conscious mind caught up. Threat assessment. Cole approaching from the northeast, 15 feet, 12, 10. Marco by the east wall already moving. Santos near the kitchen entrance adjusting position. No visible weapons on Cole. Emotional state volatile. Physical threat to Dominic minimal. To the woman, significant. He responded to the kiss, not with hunger, with deliberate intent. His arms circled her waist, drawing her close, slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. She pressed closer instead, fingers clutching his lapels, transferring the full weight of her fear from her body to his. He had carried wounded soldiers through fire, carried dead brothers to extraction. He knew what it felt like to hold another person's survival in your arms. When the kiss broke, he looked down into brown eyes bright with unshed tears. Saw the bruise on her left shoulder that makeup could not quite conceal. The slight swelling along her jaw that spoke of history, not incident. He leaned close. Not romance, tactical communication. He will not touch you again. Cole arrived then, face distorted with alcohol and the particular fury of men who mistake ownership for love. She is with me. Dominic turned slowly. 20 years of war and 10 years of crime had taught him that controlled movement in a moment of chaos communicates more than any threat. Cole saw it. The words forming in his mouth dissolved. Marco appeared at Dominic's right. Santos at his left. 2 additional men materialized, blocking Cole's lines of approach and retreat. Standard cordon, 4 points, no gaps. Dominic did not raise his voice. The quiet professionals who trained him had taught that real authority lives in silence, not volume. Not anymore. 2 words. Final. The sound of a door closing permanently. Cole looked at Elena, searching for the submission he was accustomed to. The apology, the retreat. He did not find it. Elena lifted her chin. Her voice trembled but held. It is over, Ryan. Something architectural collapsed behind Cole's eyes. The invisible cage he had built around this woman for 2 years cracked and fell in the space between one heartbeat and the next. He looked at Dominic, at the men flanking him, at 300 witnesses, and made the only calculation his cowardice would allow. He left, backing away, muttering promises his body could not honor. Then through the main entrance, past the coat check, into a Chicago night where the wind off Lake Michigan cut through everything, pretense included. Dominic looked at Elena. Her hand still rested on his chest. She was trembling. Are you hurt? She shook her head. But he saw the bruise on her shoulder. His jaw tightened. The tremor in his left hand intensified, then stilled as he made a deliberate fist. Come with me. She should have refused, should have called a cab, gone to a shelter, gone anywhere except the home of a man whose name silenced rooms. She knew who he was. Every person in Chicago with a pulse knew that Dominic Valenti was not someone you trusted with your safety. Crime boss, underworld figure, the kind of man mothers warned daughters about. But Elena had spent 2 years with a different kind of dangerous man, the kind who brought flowers after bruises, who said his jealousy proved love, who cried when she tried to leave and promised to destroy himself or her if she walked out the door. She had packed bags 3 times in secret. Each time he found them. Each time the aftermath was worse. Dominic Valenti had told another man to leave, and the man had left. That was enough. Tonight, that was everything. Okay, she said. His driver waited outside with a black SUV, engine running, positioned for rapid departure. Force of habit. Always have an extraction plan. The ride across the city was quiet. Dominic sat beside her, near enough to feel his presence, far enough to avoid crowding. His left hand rested on the seat, tremor visible now that the adrenaline was fading. She watched him press his fingers flat against the leather to still them. 2 years with Ryan had made her an expert at reading dangerous men. The micro-expressions, the jaw tension, the hand positions. She could predict violence the way animals predict weather. Dominic's body spoke a different language than Ryan's. Power, yes, but also discipline. The tremor was not anger. It was something older, sadder, something carved into the nervous system by experiences she could not imagine. The penthouse occupied the entire 52nd floor of a glass tower on South Michigan Avenue. Private elevator. 2 men at the lobby, professional, who evaluated her with quick eyes and stepped aside. Inside, Chicago spread below them through floor-to-ceiling windows. Lake Michigan stretched east into blackness. The space was vast and cold in the way money often makes things cold. Dark furniture, art that cost more than her annual salary. But she noticed other things. A worn copy of Meditations by Marcus Aurelius on the coffee table, spine fractured from rereading. A framed photograph of 6 soldiers in desert camouflage, mountains behind them, 3 faces crossed in black ink. No alcohol anywhere. Not one bottle, just an old mechanical coffee maker on the counter, the kind that required patience. He poured 2 glasses of water, handed her one. "Drink." Her hands shook around the glass. He watched but did not reach for her. "Guest suite. Second door on the left. Lock operates from the inside only. You control it." She searched his face for the thing Ryan always hid behind kindness, the expectation, the invisible invoice. She did not find it. What she found was exhaustion so deep it seemed structural, built into the bones of his face like the lines around his gray eyes. "Why?" she asked. "You do not know me." "I have watched men beat women in 4 countries," he said quietly. "Every time I stood by and did nothing, I lost something I could not get back. I do not have much left to lose." Exhaustion hit her then, 2 years of hypervigilance crashing at once. She nodded, walked down the hall, entered the guest suite, closed the door, tested the lock. It held. She slid down with her back against the wood and cried without sound because silence was how she had survived and the habit was not gone yet. Then she slept. Deep, dreamless. The first safe sleep in 2 years. Sunlight woke her. That alone was disorienting. In Ryan's apartment, the blinds stayed closed. He said it was because he worked late. The truth was that darkness was architecture, part of the cage. Here, morning poured through glass walls like a promise. Lake Shore Drive hummed far below. Lake Michigan caught silver light. The room was enormous. Her dress hung cleaned and pressed on a chair. A note on the nightstand in military handwriting, precise and economical. "Breakfast on the terrace, no rush." She showered with real water pressure for the first time in months, found fresh clothes in the closet. Her size. He had prepared. That fact disturbed her. Preparation meant anticipation. The question was how far back the anticipation went. On the terrace, Dominic sat reading a newspaper, coffee steaming beside him. Morning light turned the silver in his hair almost white. He looked older in daylight, harder. But his eyes softened when she appeared. "Good morning." She sat. Ate. He poured juice without asking. They sat in a silence that felt unexpectedly like rest. "What happens now?" she asked. "Ryan knows your address. He is being watched. He will not come near you." "And after?" "Your choice. Stay until it is safe. Leave tomorrow if you prefer. I will arrange a new apartment, security, legal protection, whatever you need." "And the cost?" He looked at her directly. "There is no cost." "There is always a cost." Something shifted in his expression. Not offense, recognition. He had heard this logic before, probably lived by it. "You are right," he said. "But the cost is mine, not yours. I owe a debt that has nothing to do with you. Helping you is how I make a payment on it." She did not understand what he meant, not yet. His phone buzzed. He glanced at it, face hardening, excused himself. Through the glass door she heard him speaking, low and rapid, to someone he called Ghost. She caught fragments. "Cole is cornered. He will do something stupid. Keep 2 men on Elena's old apartment. And Ghost, check on the Corsetti situation. Victor is moving money again." He returned, expression neutral. "Ryan attempted to contact you. My people intercepted. Threats. The kind frightened men make when they realize they have no power left." Fear spiked in her chest. He saw it immediately. "He cannot reach you here. I give you my word." His word. The word of a crime boss. She almost laughed. But the thing about desperate situations is they teach you to measure promises, not by the character of the person making them, but by their capacity to deliver. And Dominic Valenti had more capacity than anyone she had ever met. That afternoon, while he was gone, she explored the penthouse, not snooping, studying. 2 years with Ryan had sharpened her eyes into instruments of survival, and a lifetime of graphic design had trained her to see patterns that others missed. Alignment, repetition, the details that did not match. Dominic's office door was unlocked. She hesitated at the threshold, then entered. The room was functional. A desk cluttered with folders, financial statements, a laptop, maps of the South Side with locations marked in red. A second photograph of his military unit, this one taken in what looked like an Afghan village, the men in full kit, weapons visible, mountains rising behind them like teeth. She was about to leave when a folder caught her eye. It was older than the others, worn edges, different color tab. And on that tab, handwritten in ink that had faded with time, a name that stopped the air in her lungs. Marchetti, Thomas J. Her father. Thomas Marchetti was a forensic accountant, not glamorous, not exciting at dinner parties. He spent his days tracking money through spreadsheets, following the invisible rivers of cash that flowed beneath legitimate business. He was quiet, methodical, and kind in the way that only patient men can be. He helped Elena with homework at the kitchen table, built her a treehouse in the backyard of their Bridgeport house, drove her to art classes on Saturdays, and waited in the car reading financial journals. He died when she was 18. House fire. Electrical fault, investigators said. She was at college, first semester at the School of the Art Institute. Got the call at 2 in the morning, drove home in a borrowed car, stood on the sidewalk watching her childhood reduced to smoke. She always suspected it was not an accident. Her father had been nervous in the weeks before, making copies of documents late at night, telling her to keep her passport current, strange advice from a man who never traveled. But suspicion without evidence is just grief in costume. She had no proof, no leads, no resources. Just an unanswered question she carried like shrapnel, embedded and impossible to remove. Now she held a folder with his name on it in the office of a crime boss. Inside, financial records, account numbers, shell companies, transactions dated 6 years ago, the months surrounding her father's death, handwritten margin notes in unfamiliar writing referencing meetings, deliverables, exposure risks, and one line circled in red ink that made her blood stop moving. Marchetti has copies. If he talks, both organizations are exposed. Both organizations. Her father had not been investigating one criminal operation. He had been investigating two, the Corsetti family, and the network that Dominic Valenti would later build into his own. Footsteps in the hallway. She closed the folder, replaced it, stepped out of the office with her pulse hammering so loudly she was certain it echoed off the glass walls. Dominic appeared from around the corner, phone in hand, speaking Italian. He saw her, registered her position near his office. Something passed behind his gray eyes. Not anger, assessment. He ended the call. "You found it," he said. Not a question. The door had been unlocked, the folder in plain sight. He had expected this, perhaps even arranged it. "My father." Her voice did not shake. She refused to give him that. "You knew my father." He was quiet for a long time. The tremor in his left hand returned. This time he did not try to conceal it. "I knew of him. He worked for the Corsettis. Vincent Corsetti, the father. Your father was their forensic accountant. He discovered large-scale money laundering, millions moving through shells and real estate. He documented everything. And then he died." "Yes." "Did you kill him?" The question filled the hallway like smoke. "No." His voice was flat, operational. A man delivering a report, not a defense. "Vincent Corsetti ordered your father eliminated when he learned Thomas was preparing to bring evidence to the FBI. I was low level then, no authority, no power to stop it. But you knew." "I learned afterward, yes. And you did nothing." He did not flinch, did not look away. "I did nothing. I told myself it was not my fight, that the man was already dead and silence would not bring him back. I used every excuse a coward has ever used for looking the other way, and I have carried that for 6 years. Her nails bit into her palms. Pain kept her upright. "Is that why you brought me here? Guilt?" "Partly. When surveillance identified you as Thomas Marchetti's daughter living with a man who was hurting you, something broke open that I had spent 6 years trying to keep closed. I did not arrange the kiss. I did not plan for you to approach me. But when you did, I knew what it was." "What?" "A chance I do not deserve, to stop looking the other way." She stared at him, this man with his steady voice and trembling hand, his bookshelves and his dead friends and his sins he admitted without flinching. The man who had saved her tonight and might have been complicit in the death of her father. She could leave. She should leave. Walk through the door he swore would never be locked, take the elevator down 52 floors, step into the frozen Chicago night. Call the FBI. Call anyone. Start running and never stop. But if she left, she would never know. Her father had spent years building a case. He had copies of evidence somewhere, hidden, waiting. If those documents still existed, they could bring down the Corsettis. They could expose the truth of a fire that was not electrical and a death that was not accidental. They could deliver justice that 6 years of grief had been denied. And they were here, somewhere in this world of shadows and debts and loyalty bought with blood. Somewhere in the files and encrypted drives of the organization built by the man standing in front of her, with guilt in his eyes and her father's name on his desk. She made her decision. I'm staying. Dominic nodded. If relief touched him, he buried it. Not for you. Her voice was iron now, forged in the furnace of everything she had lost and everything she would not accept losing. For my father. He tried to do the right thing and he was murdered for it. If his evidence still exists, I will find it, and when I do, I will hand it to the people who can use it, against the Corsettis. She paused. Let the next words carry their full weight. And if that evidence leads back to you, I will hand it over just the same. He held her gaze for a long time. City light pulsed against the windows. Wind pressed against glass, 52 stories above the street. The tremor in his hand was visible, rhythmic, the only honest thing about him. Fair enough, he said. He turned and walked away. His left hand shook at his side, and he made no effort to hide it. She watched until he disappeared around the corner. And then she stood alone in the hallway of a penthouse, built on money that had been washed clean of everything except the blood it was born in. She was not a damsel. She was not anyone's woman. She was Thomas Marchetti's daughter, and she was going to find the truth about who killed her father, even if it meant destroying the only shelter she had. The guest suite door closed behind her. The lock turned from the inside. And the story that would change everything began not with love, not with passion, not with the fairy tale rescue the kiss had promised, but with a dead man's name in a folder and a daughter who refused to let the silence stand. Outside, Chicago exhaled frost into the dark. Somewhere in the city, Ryan Cole was drinking and planning. Somewhere else, Victor Corsetti was moving money and positioning pieces on a board that Dominic did not yet know existed. And in a federal building downtown, an agent named Catherine Reeves added a new photograph to a wall she had been building for 5 years. The photograph showed a man and a woman kissing at a charity gala, and beneath it she wrote 2 words in blue marker. Leverage. Finally. The game had begun, and no one at this table, not Elena, not Dominic, not the ghost of Thomas Marchetti watching from wherever dead men go, knew all the rules, but they were about to learn. War does not always arrive with gunfire. Sometimes it arrives with a phone call from a banker who will not look you in the eye. Dominic learned this on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after the gala, standing on his terrace at 6:15 with coffee going cold in his hand and Marco's voice coming through the phone with the kind of calm that only delivers bad news. They bought the loan. Which loan? The big one. The commercial real estate portfolio, 12 properties. Corsetti's people acquired the lending bank yesterday through a shell company registered in Delaware. As of this morning, Victor Corsetti effectively holds the mortgage on 60% of your legitimate holdings. Dominic said nothing for a long time. Below him, Chicago was waking up. Delivery trucks on Michigan Avenue, early joggers along the lakefront. A city going about its business, unaware that a war had just begun in the silence between 2 men on a phone call. What else? He asked. Marco hesitated. That hesitation told Dominic everything. IRS audit notices, 3 restaurants, the logistics warehouse in Bridgeport, and 2 of our real estate partners received calls yesterday from attorneys representing Corsetti interests. Friendly calls, suggesting they might want to reconsider their business relationships. Dominic closed his eyes, felt the cold Chicago wind push against his face, felt the tremor in his left hand intensify until the coffee mug rattled against its saucer. He set it down. Victor Corsetti was not his father. Old Vincent had been a blunt instrument. Threats, violence, the old ways. Victor was something more dangerous, educated, patient. He did not send men with guns. He sent men with law degrees and the kind of financial leverage that could dismantle an empire without a shot fired. This was not a street war. This was a siege. And Dominic recognized the shape of it immediately. Victor was attacking his center of gravity, not the illegal operations, which were diffuse and hard to target, the legitimate businesses, the restaurants and properties that gave him his public face, his ability to exist in daylight. Destroy those, and Dominic would be exposed, vulnerable to law enforcement, to rivals, to anyone. He called Ghost. James Harlan answered on the second ring. Dominic had known this man for 22 years. They had earned their Green Berets on the same day at Fort Bragg. Ghost had been his team's medical sergeant, MOS 18D, the man who kept them alive when bullets started flying. In the Tangi Valley, when shrapnel tore through Dominic's forearm, Ghost had clamped the severed artery with his bare hands and held pressure for 47 minutes, waiting for the Black Hawk. That was Ghost. That was the kind of man he was. Or had been. "Corsetti is making his move," Dominic said. "Economic warfare. He bought our lending bank." Ghost was quiet for a moment. "How bad?" "Bad enough. He controls the mortgages on most of our legitimate properties. IRS audits incoming on 3 restaurants. Partners getting squeezed. What is his endgame?" "Bankruptcy. Force us into default, seize the properties through the bank, use the IRS audits to freeze our accounts, strip away every legal asset until there is nothing left but the shadow operation, and then let law enforcement do the rest." "Smart. Very. What do you need from me?" Dominic looked out over the city. The lake was gray this morning, the same color as his eyes, the same color as the sky that had hung over the Tangi Valley on the day 3 of his brothers died. "I need you to run logistics, secure our supply chains, move what needs to be moved before the audits hit. And Ghost, I need you to be honest with me. If this goes sideways, I need to know you are with me." The pause before Ghost answered lasted exactly 1 second too long. In conversation, 1 second is nothing. In the silence between men who have bled together, 1 second is a canyon. "I am with you, Dom, always." Dominic ended the call, stood alone on the terrace. The coffee was cold, the city was indifferent, and somewhere in the back of his skull, in the place where 20 years of combat had installed a threat detection system that never fully powered down, a small red light began to blink. Something was wrong with Ghost. He pushed the thought aside. There were more immediate problems. Elena appeared on the terrace 20 minutes later, hair still damp from the shower, wearing the same careful expression she had worn every morning since the gala. Watchful, evaluating. She moved through the penthouse the way a reconnaissance element moves through unfamiliar terrain, cataloging everything, trusting nothing, always aware of the nearest exit. He respected that. More than respected it. It was the correct way to operate in enemy territory, and she was smart enough to understand that this penthouse, for all its luxury, was exactly that. "You look like you have not slept," she said, pouring herself juice. "Corsetti is moving against my businesses. Economic attack, loans, audits, pressure on partners." She sat across from him. He noticed she always chose the chair with the clearest sight line to the door. Another habit built by violence. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because it affects you. If my legitimate businesses collapse, my ability to protect you collapses with them. You should know the situation." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that surprised him. "My father was a forensic accountant. He spent his career following money. I grew up watching him work at the kitchen table, spreadsheets everywhere, connecting dots that no one else could see. I am a graphic designer, not an accountant. But I understand patterns. I understand how information hides in plain sight." She looked at him directly. "If Corsetti's operation runs on laundered money, there is a trail. There is always a trail. My father found it once. I can find it again." Dominic studied her. This woman who had come to him broken and desperate 3 weeks ago was not the same person sitting across from him now. Something had shifted. The fear was still there, layered beneath the surface, but on top of it was something harder. Purpose. The granite foundation of a person who has found a reason to stop running and start fighting. "If you find evidence," he said carefully, "what will you do with it?" "Give it to the FBI." "That evidence could implicate me as well." "I know." They looked at each other across the table. The honesty between them was not comfortable. It was not warm. It was the kind of honesty that exists between two people who have decided that truth, however painful, is preferable to the lies that got them here. "Then we have an understanding," he said. "We do." He did not try to change her mind. He did not negotiate or manipulate or leverage the fact that she was living under his protection. He simply nodded and accepted the terms. Because somewhere beneath the crime boss and the compromises and the decade of moral erosion, the Green Beret still understood a fundamental principle. You do not earn loyalty by demanding it. You earn it by deserving it. He was not sure he deserved hers, but he could try. The weeks that followed were the strangest of Elena's life. She had escaped one cage only to find herself inside a different kind of structure, one that did not lock from the outside, but was bounded by invisible walls of power, surveillance, and debt. She was free to leave at any time. Dominic reminded her of this regularly, but leaving meant abandoning the search for her father's evidence, and that was a price she was not willing to pay. So she stayed, and in staying, she began to see the man behind the operation. Dominic Valenti at 3 in the morning was a different creature than Dominic Valenti at noon. During the day, he was controlled, precise, deliberate in every word and movement. At night, the architecture collapsed. She heard him through the walls sometimes, not screaming, something worse. Low sounds, the guttural choking of a man fighting something in his sleep that could not be fought awake. Once, unable to ignore it, she opened her door and found him sitting on the hallway floor, back against the wall, eyes open but not seeing. His hands were shaking badly enough that the photograph he was holding, the one of his ODA team with the 3 black crosses, rattled against his knee. She sat beside him, did not speak, did not touch him, did not ask questions. Just sat in the dark hallway of a penthouse 52 stories above the city and let him know that someone was there. After a long time, his breathing steadied. "Tangi Valley," he said quietly. "Every night. Same road, same turn, same explosion. 3 men. They trusted me to keep them alive and I led them down that road." She said nothing. She had learned from 2 years with Ryan that some pain exists beyond the reach of words, and the kindest thing you can do is simply witness it without trying to fix it. "I was the team leader," he continued, 12-man ODA. "Our mission was training Afghan National Army soldiers in Helmand Province. Intelligence said the road was clear. I made the call to take it. 200 meters in, the IED detonated. Staff Sergeant Paulson lost both legs. Corporal Davis was killed instantly. Staff Sergeant Moreno survived the blast, but died during medevac. Ghost saved my life. Clamped my femoral artery for 47 minutes with his bare hands while I bled into the dust." He looked at the photograph, at the 3 crossed faces. "I have made a lot of bad decisions since then. Building this organization, hurting people who did not deserve it. The man with the laundry business on Halstead Street, his name was Gerald Okonkwo, owned that shop for 15 years, refused to pay protection. So I had his supplier cut off, his lease terminated, his credit destroyed. He lost everything. His wife left, his kids went to her mother's house. Last I heard he was living in a shelter on the west side." He said it without self-pity, without asking for absolution, just laying the facts on the floor between them the way a soldier lays out equipment before an inventory. "I tell myself there is a difference between me and men like Corsetti, that I have lines I will not cross. But the truth is, the lines keep moving. Every year they move a little further, and one day you look up and you cannot remember where they started." Elena finally spoke, quietly. "My father died trying to do the right thing. You survived by doing the wrong thing. The question is what you do with the time you bought." He looked at her. In the darkness, his gray eyes were almost black. "I do not know yet," he said, "but I think you are the reason I am going to find out." She did not know how to respond to that, so she stood, went back to her room, and lay in the dark thinking about a man who was simultaneously her protector and her target, her shelter, and the person most likely to be connected to the worst thing that had ever happened to her. Love was not the right word for what was growing between them. Trust was not either. It was something without a clean name. Recognition, maybe. The way 2 damaged people can look at each other across a distance of pain and see, not a reflection, but a parallel. Someone fighting a different war with the same wounds. He taught her self-defense in the mornings. Not romantic, not cinematic, practical and blunt. How to break a wrist grip. How to use a pen as a weapon. How to create distance and reach an exit. He taught the way he had been taught, by repetition and correction, patient but unsparing. "I am teaching you this because I cannot be beside you every hour of every day," he said. "And because you should never need anyone beside you every hour of every day. Dependence is not safety. It is a different kind of cage." The words hit her harder than any of the techniques, because they named the thing she feared most, that she was replacing one form of captivity with another, that the penthouse was just a more expensive version of Ryan's apartment, that she was trading bruises for comfort and calling it freedom. Dominic saw the thought cross her face. Read it the way he read everything, with the precision of a man trained to extract information from micro-expressions and body language. "If you ever feel that way," he said, "leave. Do not ask permission. Do not explain. Just go. The door is always open." She believed him, and believing him made her stay. Ryan Cole resurfaced on a Thursday. Elena was leaving her design studio in the Loop, a workspace Dominic had helped her reestablish by connecting her with clients through his legitimate business contacts. She had insisted on paying rent from her own earnings. Small assertion of independence. Important. She stepped onto the sidewalk, and there he was. Thinner than she remembered, unshaven, eyes glassy from weeks of steady drinking. Standing across the street with his hands in his pockets and an expression she had never seen on him before. Fear. Not the performed fear he used when she tried to leave. Not theatrical tears. Genuine terror. The kind that lives in the bones. Elena. She stopped. Every nerve in her body fired at once. 2 years of conditioning screamed at her to run, to submit, to make herself small. But she was not that woman anymore. Or rather, she was that woman plus 3 weeks of sleeping without fear, plus the growing understanding that she had survived worse than whatever Ryan Cole had left to offer. "You should not be here," she said. I know, just listen, please." He crossed the street. She did not retreat. Her hand found her phone in her pocket. One press and Marco would have men here in 4 minutes. "They are going to kill me, Elena." She had expected threats, manipulation, the familiar cycle of rage and tears. She had not expected this. Who? Corsetti. Victor Corsetti. I owe his people money. A lot of money. And they do not want the money anymore. They want me to do something for them, and I cannot do it. And if I do not do it, they will make me disappear. She studied him the way Dominic had taught her to study people, looking for the tells, the micro-expressions that separated truth from performance. What she saw was not performance. Ryan Cole was genuinely afraid for his life. "What do they want you to do?" He swallowed, looked around. The survival instincts of a cornered animal. "They want me to get close to you again, to find out what you know about your father's files. They think your father left evidence somewhere, and they think you are looking for it. Corsetti wants that evidence destroyed before anyone else finds it." The world tilted slightly. She felt the sidewalk shift beneath her feet. "Corsetti knows about my father?" "Corsetti ordered it, Elena. The fire. Your father. All of it. His father gave the command, and Victor has been cleaning up the loose ends ever since. Your father's evidence is the last loose end." She felt something cold and sharp crystallize in her chest. Not surprise. Confirmation. The things she had suspected for 6 years, spoken aloud on a Chicago sidewalk by the man who used to hit her. "Why are you telling me this?" Ryan's face crumpled. "Not performance. Collapse. Because I am a coward, Elena. I have always been a coward. I hit you because I was weak, and you were the only person weaker than me. I gambled because I could not face my own life, and now I owe money to men who will bury me in a basement, and no one will ever look. I am telling you because I have nothing left. No angle, no play, just the truth. And the truth is the only thing I have never tried." She stood there on the sidewalk, pedestrians flowing around them, and looked at the man who had terrorized her for 2 years. She did not forgive him. She would never forgive him. The bruises had faded, but the architecture of fear he had built inside her nervous system would take years to dismantle. But she saw something unexpected. Ryan Cole was a product of the same darkness that had killed her father. A small man consumed by a machine that used small men as fuel. He was not innocent, but he was, in this moment, telling the truth. And the truth was useful. "Go to the FBI," she said. He stared at her. "What?" "Agent Catherine Reeves, Organized Crime Task Force, Chicago Field Office. She has been building a case against Corsetti for years. Go to her. Tell her everything. The gambling debts. What Corsetti asked you to do. What you know about my father. They will kill me before I ever testify. Dominic's people can protect you until you are in federal custody." Ryan laughed, broken. "Dominic Valenti protecting me. That is the punchline of my entire life. It is the only option that does not end with you in a basement." He looked at her for a long time. Wind off the lake pushed between them, carrying the smell of cold water and diesel. Then he nodded, once, the way men nod when they have run out of alternatives and found, in that emptiness, something that might be courage. He walked away, smaller than she remembered, older. The man who had once made her feel like the weakest person in any room diminished to his actual size, which was not very large at all. She called Marco, reported the contact. Within an hour, Dominic knew everything. That night, she found what she had been searching for. It began with a pattern. Her father had always loved puzzles, weekend crosswords, logic problems. the kind of mind that found satisfaction in hidden structures. When she was 12, he had set up a scavenger hunt for her birthday, each clue encoding the location of the next in a cipher only she would recognize, because every cipher used her birthday as the key. The USB drive was in a safe deposit box at First Midwest Bank in Bridgeport. The box was registered under the Treehouse Trust, named for the structure her father had built in their backyard. The key was with the estate attorney, held in a sealed envelope with a passphrase only Elena would know. The date of her first art show, September 14th, 2014. She retrieved the drive on a Wednesday afternoon, accompanied by two of Dominic's men who waited outside without knowing what she was collecting. Inside was exactly what she expected and feared: spreadsheets, transaction records, account numbers, shell company registrations, a forensic accountant's meticulous documentation of money laundering operations spanning 7 years, her father's handwriting in the margins, careful notes, cross-references, the work of a man who understood that the evidence he was compiling might be the last important thing he ever did. The evidence implicated the Corsetti organization comprehensively. Millions laundered through seafood distributors, real estate transactions, and construction companies. Names, dates, amounts, routing numbers. Enough to sustain federal RICO charges that would dismantle Victor Corsetti's entire operation. But there was more. A separate folder on the drive, smaller, less complete. Documentation of financial irregularities in what would later become Dominic Valenti's organization. Money moving through the same channels, smaller amounts, fewer transactions, but present, documented, damning. Her father had been investigating both. Elena sat in her room at the penthouse, USB drive in her hand, and felt the weight of it. This small piece of plastic and metal contained the truth about her father's murder, the weapon that could destroy Corsetti, and the evidence that could send Dominic Valenti to federal prison. She had told Dominic she would use whatever she found against whoever it implicated. She had meant it. But meaning something in theory and holding the instrument of its execution in your hand are very different experiences. She had not anticipated that by the time she found the evidence, she would also have found something else. Not love, exactly. Something more complicated and less comfortable. A connection built on honesty so brutal it left marks. A recognition between two people who had both been broken by violence and were both trying, in their different ways, to build something from the wreckage. She could hand the entire drive to Agent Reeves. Corsetti would fall. Dominic would fall with him. She would be alone again, but safe. Protected by the federal government instead of a crime boss. A cleaner arrangement, if a lonelier one. Or she could give Dominic the Corsetti evidence and withhold the files that implicated him. Let him use it as a weapon against his enemy. Protect the man who had protected her. But that would make her complicit, an accessory to the selective deployment of evidence for criminal purposes. It would make her exactly the kind of person her father had spent his career investigating. She put the drive in her pocket and said nothing to anyone. Not yet. The answer came from an unexpected direction. 3 days after Elena found the drive, Dominic asked her to meet him on the terrace. His face carried an expression she had not seen before. Not the controlled calm of his professional persona, not the raw vulnerability of his 3 a.m. episodes. Something between them. The face of a man who has discovered a betrayal so deep it has restructured his understanding of the world. "Ghost is the leak," he said. She waited. "James Harlan, my oldest friend. The man who kept me alive in the Tangi Valley with his bare hands. He has been feeding information to Corsetti for 8 months." The words landed in the space between them and sat there, heavy with implications. "How did you find out?" Marco traced the information leaks. Meeting schedules that only 3 people knew showing up in Corsetti's movements. Financial data that should have been encrypted appearing in reports to Corsetti's attorneys. The trail led to Ghost. I confirmed it this morning through a source inside Corsetti's organization. "Why?" Dominic's jaw tightened. The tremor in his left hand became visible. He gripped the railing of the terrace with both hands and looked out over the city. His daughter, Lily, 16 years old, acute lymphoblastic leukemia, diagnosed 11 months ago, treatment at Northwestern Memorial. The projected cost is over $400,000. Ghost's Fee A benefits were denied because of a paperwork technicality in his discharge documents. He appealed, was denied again. Filed a congressional inquiry. still pending. He paused. The wind pushed through his silver hair. Corsetti approached him 9 months ago, offered to cover Lily's treatment. All of it, in exchange for information. Ghost held out for a month. Then Lily's white cell count dropped to a level that the oncologist described as critical. Ghost made a phone call. And every month since, he has delivered a report to Corsetti's people. And every month, Corsetti has paid Northwestern Memorial. Elena watched Dominic's face as he told this story. She was looking for rage, for the cold calculation of a man planning retribution. What she saw was grief. The specific grief of a soldier who has lost a brother not to enemy fire, but to the failures of the system they both served. "What will you do?" she asked. He was quiet for a long time. "If I were the man Corsetti thinks I am, Ghost would already be dead. That is how this world works. Betrayal has one consequence. Everyone knows the rules. But Ghost is not a traitor. Not really. He is a father whose daughter is dying and whose country abandoned him. The VA failed him. The system that was supposed to catch veterans like him, support them, keep them from falling through the cracks, it failed. I know because it failed me, too. I just fell through a different crack." He turned from the railing, looked at her. "I called him here. He will be on the terrace in 20 minutes. I want you to stay inside." She nodded, but she did not go far. She stood in the living room, near enough to see through the glass door, but far enough to give them privacy. Witness, not participant. Ghost arrived. She had seen him before, a tall man with a shaved head and the quiet efficiency of movement that marked every Special Forces veteran she had encountered through Dominic. He walked onto the terrace and stood facing Dominic the way you stand facing someone you have shared a foxhole with. Square, honest, without pretense. Dominic spoke first. She could not hear the words through the glass, but she could read the body language, the slight forward lean that said, "I know." The stillness that said, "I am not going to make this easy." The absence of aggression that said, "But I am not going to make it violent either." Ghost's reaction told her everything. His shoulders dropped, not with relief, with the collapse of a weight he had been carrying alone for months. He spoke rapidly, hands moving in gestures she recognized from Dominic's descriptions of how operators briefed under stress. Then he stopped. And then, in a moment that Elena would remember for the rest of her life, this tall, hard, battle-tested man put his face in his hands and wept. She could not hear what Dominic said next, but she saw him step forward, saw him put a hand on Ghost's shoulder, saw Ghost grab that hand and hold it the way a man holds a lifeline. When Ghost left 20 minutes later, his face was wrecked, but his posture had changed. He walked straighter, lighter, as if something that had been crushing him from the inside had been, if not removed, then shared. Dominic came inside. His eyes were red, though his face was composed. "He is gone," he said. "I told him to take Lily and go. Use Corsetti's money. I do not want it back, but he cannot come back. Not ever." "You let him go?" "He saved my life in that valley. He kept me breathing when I should have bled out. Whatever he took from me since then does not equal that debt." Elena looked at this man and felt the last clean boundary between her loyalty and her mission blur to the point of invisibility. This was not a good man. He had done terrible things and would likely do more. But there was a core in him, buried under a decade of compromise, that still responded to something deeper than self-interest. Call it the soldier's code, call it whatever you want, it was there. And it was making her decision infinitely harder. The next morning, she went for coffee at a shop 2 blocks from the penthouse. A routine she had established in the second week, one small act of normalcy in an abnormal life. Dominic's men followed at a distance, discreet, professional. She had learned to identify them by their shoes, always practical, always rubber-soled. She ordered a latte and sat at her usual table by the window. A woman sat down across from her, mid-40s, brown hair, unremarkable clothing, the kind of face that was designed to be forgotten, which was exactly the point. "Ms. Marchetti, my name is Catherine Reeves. I am a special agent with the FBI Organized Crime Task Force." Elena's hand tightened around her coffee cup. She did not run, did not signal the surveillance team outside. Instead, she looked at the woman across from her and recognized the careful patience of a professional who had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. "You know who I am," Reeves continued. It was not a question. "And I know who you are. More importantly, I know what you have." "I do not know what you are talking about." "The USB drive your father left in a safe deposit box in Bridgeport. The drive you retrieved last Wednesday at 2:47 p.m. from First Midwest Bank. Elena felt the ground shift beneath her. Reeves had been watching, not Dominic's surveillance, federal surveillance, longer, more patient, operating on a timeline measured in years rather than weeks. "Your father was a brave man," Reeves said. Her voice softened slightly, the first crack in the professional armor. "We were developing him as a source before he was killed. We were too slow. I carry that." She reached into her jacket and placed a business card on the table. Plain white, federal seal, direct number. "I have been building a case against the Corsetti organization for 5 years. Your father's evidence is the keystone. With it, I can bring federal RICO charges that will dismantle Victor Corsetti's entire operation. Without it," he continues, "more laundering, more corruption, more people hurt." "And Dominic Valenti?" Reeves held her gaze. "The drive contains evidence that implicates Valenti as well. I will not lie to you about that." "What are you asking me to do?" "Hand over the drive, all of it. In exchange, we offer you full immunity, relocation through the witness security program, new identity, new life, safety that does not depend on the goodwill of a crime boss." Elena looked at the business card on the table, looked at the woman who had placed it there, looked through the window at the city where her father had lived, worked, died. "Dominic Valenti is not a good man," Reeves said. "I say this with respect for his service. I know his record, Bronze Star, 2 Purple Hearts, 20 years defending this country. But the man he became after is not the man he was before. Every day you remain in his orbit, you are in danger. Not just from Corsetti, from the life itself." Then Reeves said the thing that cut deepest. "You escaped an abusive partner by running to a powerful man. I understand why. It felt like the only option. But protection that depends on one person's power is not freedom, Ms. Marchetti. It is a different architecture of the same cage. Your father understood that. He chose to bring evidence to the system, imperfect as it is, because the system does not ask for loyalty in exchange for justice." Elena sat perfectly still. The coffee grew cold in her hands. Outside, the surveillance team had not detected Reeves. Or perhaps they had and were reporting to Dominic right now. Either way, the clock had started. "I need time," she said. "You have less than you think. Corsetti is accelerating. If he discovers the drive exists before we can act, he will come for it, and he will come through you." Reeves stood, left the card on the table, walked out of the coffee shop without looking back. Professional, clean, the exit of a woman who had made her pitch and was confident enough in its logic to let it work without pressure. Elena sat alone. Outside, Chicago moved in its endless rhythm. Cars, pedestrians, the machinery of a city indifferent to the wars being fought in its margins. She went home. Home. The word had started to mean the penthouse, and that fact terrified her more than Corsetti, more than the FBI, more than anything Reeves had said. She was building attachment, roots, the beginning of belonging in a place that was built on crimes that had killed her father. That evening nausea hit her, not the nausea of anxiety, which she knew well. Something different, lower, deeper. The kind of sickness that comes not from what you are thinking, but from what your body is doing without your permission. She knew before she took the test. Women know. Some fundamental signal that travels faster than chemistry, older than language. She bought the test at a pharmacy 3 blocks away, took it in the bathroom of the guest suite with the door locked and her hands steady through pure force of will. 2 lines, unmistakable, clear. She sat on the bathroom floor, test in one hand, phone in the other, stared at the ceiling. The penthouse was silent. Dominic was downstairs in his office. Ghost was gone. Marco was running security protocols. The city hummed beyond the glass. She was pregnant. She was carrying the child of a crime boss who might have been complicit in her father's death. She was holding a USB drive that could send that man to federal prison. She was being courted by the FBI to become a witness, and the only person in the world she trusted enough to tell any of this to was the person most endangered by all of it. She opened the bathroom cabinet, looked at herself in the mirror. Brown eyes, dark hair, 24 years old. Thomas Marchetti's daughter. Dominic Valenti's... what? Not girlfriend, not partner. Something that did not have a word. She thought about her father, the patient man at the kitchen table with his spreadsheets and his puzzles, the man who built her a treehouse and drove her to art lessons and believed, to his last breath, that the right thing was worth dying for. She thought about the child growing inside her, no bigger than a seed, already the most important variable in every equation she was trying to solve. She put the pregnancy test in her jacket pocket, beside the USB drive, walked out of the bathroom, down the hall, stopped at the window where the city spread below her like a map of every choice she had never wanted to make. Her father had died holding evidence that could bring down 2 criminal organizations. Now his daughter stood in the penthouse of one of those organizations, carrying that same evidence, pregnant with the child of the man who had built it. Both objects in her pockets weighed almost nothing. Together, they weighed more than she could measure. Outside, the wind off Lake Michigan pushed against the glass hard enough to make it groan. Somewhere in the city, Victor Corsetti was studying financial reports and planning his next move. Somewhere, Ryan Cole was sitting in a bar trying to decide if courage was something he could borrow from the bottom of a glass. Somewhere, Agent Reeves was adding new information to a wall of photographs and documents that stretched back 5 years and was now, finally, nearing completion. And somewhere in a hospital room in Milwaukee, a 16-year-old girl named Lily was receiving chemotherapy paid for with blood money, while her father sat beside her crying silently, knowing that the price of her survival was the destruction of the only brotherhood he had ever known. Every person in this story was trapped. Every cage was different, and the only key that might open any of them was a dead man's evidence and the choices his daughter made next. Elena pressed her forehead against the cold glass, closed her eyes, put one hand on her stomach and the other on the pocket that held a USB drive worth more than anyone in this building understood. The game was no longer chess. It was something older and less forgiving, and the next move was hers. The hardest thing Dominic Valenti ever did was not surviving the Tangi Valley. It was not building an empire from nothing. It was not watching his closest friend walk away after confessing a betrayal that should have ended in blood. The hardest thing Dominic Valenti ever did happened on a Thursday evening in the penthouse on the 52nd floor, when Elena Marchetti stood in front of him and told him 2 things that changed the trajectory of every life connected to his. She started with the USB drive. She placed it on the table between them the way you place a loaded weapon, carefully, with full awareness of its capacity to destroy. The drive was small, barely the length of her thumb, but it contained 7 years of her father's work, every transaction, every shell company, every dollar that had been scrubbed clean by the Corsetti organization and in a separate folder by the network that Dominic had built in its shadow. "My father's evidence," she said. "I found it. It is complete." Dominic looked at the drive, then at her. His gray eyes were steady, but she could see the calculation happening behind them. Not the cold arithmetic of self-preservation. Something more complicated. The mathematics of a man weighing the cost of truth against the life he had constructed on its absence. "Both organizations?" he asked. "Both." He nodded, slowly. The way a man nods when the thing he has been dreading finally arrives and turns out to be exactly as devastating as he imagined. "What will you do with it?" "I have not decided yet." Then she told him the second thing. "I am pregnant." The silence that followed was unlike any silence she had experienced in his presence. Not the controlled quiet of a man assessing a tactical situation. Not the weighted pause of a negotiator measuring his response. This was the silence of a man whose internal architecture has just been reorganized by a force he did not anticipate and cannot fight. The tremor in his left hand, the one he had spent years disguising with coffee mugs and door frames and pressed fists, erupted into a visible shake that traveled up his forearm and into his shoulder. He gripped the edge of the table, not for leverage, for stability. "Mine," he said, not a question. "Yours." He closed his eyes. For a long time he did not speak. The city hummed beyond the glass. Lake Michigan stretched east into gathering darkness. When he opened his eyes, they were wet, and the sight of moisture in those gray, controlled soldier's eyes was more unsettling to Elena than anything she had witnessed in the weeks she had spent in his world. "I never planned for this," he said quietly. "I built a life specifically designed to prevent this. No wife, no children, no vulnerability that could be leveraged or targeted. I made that decision 20 years ago, and I have not questioned it until this moment." And now he looked at her, and for the first time since the gala, she saw something in his face that was not strength or control or calculation. She saw fear, The real kind, the kind that lives beneath every layer of armor a man builds over a lifetime and waits, patient as gravity, for the moment when something finally matters enough to expose it. "Now I am terrified," he said, "and that terror is the most honest thing I have felt in 10 years. She sat down across from him. The USB drive lay between them on the table like a line drawn in the dirt. "I need you to understand something," she said. "I am not going to make this decision based on what I feel for you. I have spent 2 years letting a man's emotions dictate my choices. That is over. Whatever I do with this evidence, whatever happens between us, I will decide based on what is right, not what is safe, not what is comfortable. My father died because he believed the right thing was worth more than his own survival. I will not dishonor that by choosing convenience." Dominic looked at her across the table. This woman who had come to him broken and desperate 7 weeks ago, who had kissed him out of terror and stayed out of purpose, who was now carrying his child and holding the instrument of his destruction in a USB drive the size of her thumb. He had commanded 12-man teams through firefights. He had built a criminal organization that generated millions. He had stared down enemies who wanted him dead and allies who wanted him diminished. None of them had ever frightened him the way Elena Marchetti frightened him now, because she was not threatening him. She was simply telling him the truth, and the truth, delivered without anger or agenda, was the most powerful weapon he had ever faced. "Fair enough," he said. The same words he had spoken when she first told him she would use the evidence against him if it led there. The words meant more now, heavier, loaded with the weight of everything that had grown between them and everything that was growing inside her. They did not discuss it further that night. Some decisions need darkness and solitude before they can be made in daylight and company. She went to her room. He went to the terrace where the Chicago wind cut through his shirt and the city lights blurred below like a galaxy laid flat. He stood there until 3 in the morning, left hand trembling against the railing, thinking about his father who was never there, about the men he had led to their deaths in the Tangi Valley, about Gerald Okonkwo and the laundry shop on Halsted Street, about every choice that had brought him to this terrace on this night with a child on the way and a reckoning he could no longer outrun. The next 48 hours moved with the compressed intensity of a combat operation, and like combat, the plan did not survive first contact. Ryan Cole called Elena on a Saturday morning. His voice was a wreck. Corsetti had given him 72 hours to produce Elena's location and any information about Thomas Marchetti's files, or Ryan would be, in Corsetti's precise phrasing, resolved. Ryan had spent 3 of those hours drinking and 45 minutes driving in circles, and the rest working up the nerve to call the woman he had spent 2 years abusing and ask her to save his life. "I will go to the FBI," he said. "What you told me before. Agent Reeves. I will do it. I will tell them everything. Corsetti, the gambling, what he asked me to do, everything." Elena listened to this man, this coward who had hit her and controlled her and made her believe she deserved it, and she felt something unexpected. Not forgiveness. She would carry the damage he had inflicted for the rest of her life, woven into her nervous system like scar tissue, and forgiveness was neither owed nor possible. But she felt a grim kind of recognition. Ryan Cole was a weak man, but weakness was not the same as evil. He had been consumed by a machine that devoured weak men the way a furnace devours kindling. And now that machine was about to consume him completely unless someone offered him a way out. "Dominic's people can protect you until you reach federal custody," she said. "But you need to move now, not tomorrow, now." "I know." "And Ryan, this does not erase anything. Do you understand that? The FBI protects witnesses. They do not grant absolution." "I understand." She called Marco. Within 2 hours, Ryan Cole was in a safe location with 2 of Dominic's men standing watch, waiting for contact from Agent Reeves. The former real estate agent, who had spent 2 years destroying the woman he claimed to love, was about to become the first domino in a chain that would topple Victor Corsetti's empire. Corsetti moved faster than anyone anticipated. On Monday morning, a package arrived at 3 media outlets in Chicago simultaneously. Print journalists, television producers, online investigators. Each package contained identical materials: financial documents, photographs, recorded conversations, all of them pointing to a single conclusion. that Dominic Valenti had ordered the murder of Thomas Marchetti 6 years ago, that the house fire was arson commissioned by Valenti's organization, that Elena Marchetti was not a victim Dominic had rescued, but a witness he was controlling to suppress her father's evidence. The documents were detailed, professional, the kind of fabrication that requires significant resources and expertise. Corsetti had been preparing this package for weeks, possibly months, waiting for the right moment to deploy it. The moment was now. By Monday afternoon, 2 reporters had called Dominic's attorney requesting comment. A television crew parked outside one of his restaurants. Online forums lit up with speculation. The narrative was clean and devastating. War hero turned crime boss murders an innocent accountant and then manipulates the dead man's daughter into silence by pretending to rescue her from an abusive boyfriend. Elena saw the reports on her phone at 11:15 in the morning. For 30 seconds, the ground fell away beneath her feet. The accusations struck at the foundation of everything she had built since the gala. If Dominic had killed her father, then his guilt, the debt he claimed to carry, was not the passive shame of a man who had looked the other way. It was the active horror of a man who had ordered the murder and then spent 6 years positioning himself to manage the consequences. For 30 seconds, she believed it. Then she looked at the documents. Elena Marchetti was not a forensic accountant. She was a graphic designer. But design is, at its core, the discipline of seeing patterns. Alignment. Spacing. The relationship between elements on a page. She had spent her career training her eyes to detect inconsistencies that others overlooked. A font that did not match. A margin that was a fraction of an inch too wide. A color that was close to correct but not quite. The documents Corsetti had distributed were impressive fabrications. But they were fabrications. The financial records used a typeface that did not exist 6 years ago. A serif font released by Adobe in 2021, appearing on documents allegedly created in 2018. The metadata on the digital files showed creation dates in the current year, hastily altered, but not thoroughly enough to survive examination. One of the photographs had been composited, Dominic's image placed into a scene using editing software that left artifacts visible to anyone who knew where to look. And Elena knew where to look. She compiled her analysis in 45 minutes. Clean, methodical, the daughter of a forensic accountant applying a different kind of forensic skill. She sent it to Marco, who forwarded it to Dominic's attorney, who delivered it to the media outlets within the hour, with a statement identifying the materials as fabrications and requesting retractions. The story died before it reached prime time. Not because Dominic had power or influence, because Elena had eyes. Dominic found her in the living room afterward. She was sitting on the couch, laptop open, still examining the forged documents with the focused intensity of a person performing work that matters. "You saved me," he said. She looked up. "I established the truth. That is different." "Is it?" "Yes. I did not do it because you are you. I did it because the documents were lies, and I do not let lies stand. Not about you, not about anyone, not about my father." He sat beside her. Not close. Respecting the space she maintained even now, even pregnant with his child, even after dismantling an attack that could have destroyed him. "Elena, I need to tell you something." She waited. "I'm going to contact Agent Reeves." The words hung in the air between them, the way all irreversible words do, heavy with the gravity of their implications. "I am going to turn myself in, cooperate fully, give her everything she needs on Corsetti, and testify if necessary, and I am going to accept the consequences for my own operations." She studied his face, looking for the calculation she had come to expect from him, the strategic angle, the hidden benefit. She found none. What she found instead was the expression of a man who has finally stopped running from a decision he should have made years ago. "Why now?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Because 3 days ago you told me you would decide what to do with that evidence based on what is right, not what is safe. And I realize that I have spent 10 years doing the opposite, choosing what was safe, what was profitable, what kept me in control. I left the battlefield and built another one because control was the only thing that made the nightmares quieter. But control is not the same as courage, and the man I was before, the master sergeant who earned those medals, he would be sick at what I have become." He looked at his left hand. The tremor was constant now. "I cannot control whether you stay or go. I cannot control what our child will think of me. I cannot control what Reeves offers me or what a judge decides. The only thing I can control is walking through that door and saying, I did these things and I am ready to answer for them. You know what this means. Federal prison. Yes, the attorney says 5 to 10 years, depending on cooperation. Probably 7, reduced to 5 or less with good behavior. And your organization? Gone. Asset forfeiture. My legitimate businesses will be audited and restructured. The illegal operations will be dismantled. Most of my people will need to find new work. He paused. Marco already knows. He said he would rather drive a delivery truck as an honest man than manage restaurants as a criminal. His words. Elena looked at him. This man who had been her protector, her suspect, her partner in a complexity that defied clean categorization. She had come to his penthouse 7 weeks ago as a desperate woman kissing a stranger. Now she was carrying his child and watching him choose to surrender everything he had built. Are you doing this for me? She asked. No, I am doing this because it is right. You taught me the difference. Your father tried to do the right thing, and it cost him his life. The least I can do is try, and accept whatever it costs me. He reached for her hand, slowly, giving her the choice, the way he had given her every choice since the first night. She took his hand, held it, felt the tremor transfer from his skin to hers. I am not going to wait for you, she said. I am not going to build my life around visiting hours and phone calls and counting days. I did not escape one cage to sit outside another. I would never ask you to, but I am not going to disappear either. She squeezed his hand. This child will know who you are. Both parts. The soldier and the rest. The courage and the cost. I will not lie to protect your image, and I will not lie to destroy it. That is more than I deserve. Yes, it is. The call to Agent Reeves happened the next morning. Dominic used the landline in his office. No encryption, no attorney present for the initial contact. Just a man and a phone and a decision that had taken 10 years too long. Agent Reeves, this is Dominic Valenti. I want to come in. The silence on the other end lasted 3 seconds. In federal law enforcement, 3 seconds of silence from a seasoned agent means you have accomplished something rare. You have surprised someone who is paid not to be surprised. I am listening, Reeves said. Full cooperation. Everything I have on Victor Corsetti, including evidence of his involvement in the murder of Thomas Marchetti. I will also provide complete documentation of my own operations. Financial records, personnel, supply chains, everything. You understand what you are offering. I am offering my entire life, Agent Reeves. In exchange, I want 3 things. Prosecution of Victor Corsetti to the fullest extent. Protection for Elena Marchetti and our child, and whatever sentence a judge considers just for my crimes. I am not asking for immunity. I am asking for the chance to do one thing right after a decade of doing everything wrong. Reeves was quiet again. Then she said something that surprised him. Your father's ODA citation. I read it once years ago when I first started this case. It described a team leader who risked his life to pull wounded soldiers from a burning vehicle under enemy fire. I have always wondered what happened to that man. He got lost, Dominic said. He is trying to find his way back. The machinery of federal justice moved with a speed that surprised everyone involved. Before the warrants were issued, Agent Reeves brought Elena to the Chicago field office, not as a suspect, as a witness. But witnesses sit in the same rooms as suspects, under the same fluorescent lights, at the same metal tables. Elena sat across from Reeves, 7 months pregnant by then. The weeks between Dominic's call and this moment having passed in a blur of depositions and legal proceedings. Her hands rested on the table, not cuffed. She had imagined they would be. Reeves asked the question directly. The same question Elena had known was coming since the night of the gala. Did you know who Dominic Valenti was when you kissed him? Elena looked at the agent across the table. At the wall behind her, covered in photographs and documents, 5 years of investigation pinned in neat rows. She saw Dominic's face in one photo, her father's in another, the architecture of 2 lives connected by money and murder, and a daughter who had walked into the middle of it with nothing but a desperate kiss and the stubborn belief that the truth was worth finding. I thought he would save me, Elena said. I did not know he was connected to the reason my father died. Not then. And when you learned? I stayed. I found my father's evidence, and I am here. Reeves studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. Witness, not suspect. The distinction held. Within 72 hours of that interview, warrants were issued. Victor Corsetti was arrested at his home in Lake Forest at 6:15 in the morning by 12 FBI agents in tactical gear. His attorney was on the phone within minutes. It did not matter. The evidence was overwhelming. Thomas Marchetti's files, Ryan Cole's testimony, Ghost's information about Corsetti purchasing a federal judge, and Dominic's comprehensive documentation of Corsetti's operations created a case so airtight that Corsetti's own legal team began negotiating before the first arraignment. Ghost had returned, not to Dominic's organization, not to his old life. He appeared at the FBI field office in Chicago 3 days after Dominic made his call, carrying a laptop and a flash drive containing 18 months of communications between Victor Corsetti and a federal judge named Raymond Kilpatrick. Payments, instructions, case files that had been manipulated, a corruption network that extended from Corsetti's boardroom into the federal judiciary itself. Ghost did not come back for Dominic. He came back because his daughter Lily, between chemotherapy sessions at a hospital in Milwaukee, had asked him a question that broke him open. "Dad, are you still a good person?" He could not answer her, not honestly, and the inability to look his 16-year-old daughter in the eye and say yes was more devastating than any bullet he had ever taken or any betrayal he had ever committed. So he gathered the evidence he had accumulated during his months as Corsetti's informant, drove 4 hours to Chicago, and walked into the federal building with the same posture he had carried into combat. Straight spine, squared shoulders, the walk of a man who has decided that the truth, however painful, is preferable to the comfort of lies. He was granted immunity in exchange for testimony. The judge corruption evidence alone was enough to justify the deal. Ghost would not go to prison, but he would live the rest of his life knowing what he had done and why, and that was a sentence of a different kind. Ryan Cole testified under protection. His account of Corsetti's operations, the gambling networks, the money laundering, the use of debt as leverage to recruit unwilling participants, filled gaps in the federal case that years of investigation had failed to close. He was sentenced to 3 years probation and mandatory counseling. He left Chicago the day after sentencing, and no one in this story ever saw him again. A small man swallowed by a machine, finally spit out, diminished but alive. Victor Corsetti was convicted on 14 federal counts: RICO conspiracy, money laundering, obstruction of justice, and, in the charge that carried the heaviest weight, conspiracy to commit murder in the death of Thomas Marchetti. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. The sentence was life without the possibility of parole. Corsetti showed no emotion when the verdict was read. He had spent his entire career calculating odds, and the odds had finally turned against him. Dominic Valenti pleaded guilty to 7 counts related to his own operations: money laundering, tax fraud, criminal enterprise. His cooperation was extensive, and his testimony against Corsetti was instrumental. The judge, a former Army officer who had served 2 tours overseas herself, looked at Dominic's service record, his cooperation, and his crimes, and delivered a sentence that reflected all 3. 7 years in federal prison, eligible for release after 4 years and 8 months with good behavior, asset forfeiture of all properties and accounts connected to illegal activity, restitution payments to identified victims, including Gerald Okonkwo, whose laundry business Dominic had destroyed 5 years earlier. The day before he reported to FCI Pekin in central Illinois, Dominic met Elena at the penthouse one final time. The furniture was gone, seized or sold, the art removed, the bookshelves empty. The photograph of ODA 5131, the one with 6 soldiers and 3 black crosses, sat on the kitchen counter. He had requested permission to take it with him. The Bureau of Prisons approved. Elena stood at the window, 7 weeks pregnant now. The city she had learned to see through Dominic's eyes spread below them. It looked different without the furniture, smaller, more honest, just glass and concrete and the indifferent geometry of a building that did not care who lived in it. Dominic stood beside her. His left hand trembled. He did not hide it. "I am not going to ask you to wait," he said. "Good, because I already told you I would not." "I know." He paused. "But I want you to know that if I could go back to the night of the gala and change one thing, it would not be the kiss. It would be the 10 years before it. Every choice I made that turned me into the kind of man who needed a kiss from a desperate woman to remember what it felt like to protect someone instead of control them. She turned to face him, put her hand on his chest, felt his heartbeat, steady despite everything. "You are not the man you were," she said. "You are not the man you will be. You are somewhere in between, and somewhere in between is where most people live their entire lives." He put his hand over hers, then slowly moved it to her stomach. The flatness that would curve in the months to come, the child that would be born while he sat in a federal facility 200 miles away, missing the first breath, the first cry, the first opening of eyes that might be gray like his. "Tell him about the soldier," Dominic said. "Before the rest, tell him there was a man who served his country and loved his brothers and tried to do right. And then tell him what happened when that man stopped trying. Tell him all of it, so he knows the whole truth and can decide for himself what kind of man to be." Elena nodded. She did not cry. She had spent 2 years learning to hold tears inside her body like a reservoir, and though the dam was no longer necessary, the habit remained. He kissed her forehead, picked up the photograph, walked to the elevator. The doors opened. He stepped inside, turned to face her one last time. "Thank you," he said. The doors closed. The elevator descended 52 floors, and the penthouse was empty. 3 years later, Elena Marchetti lived in a one-bedroom apartment in Pilsen, 3 miles south of the glass tower that no longer had anything to do with her. The apartment was small, clean, warm in a way that had nothing to do with the heating system and everything to do with the finger paintings taped to the refrigerator and the small shoes by the door and the sound of a 2-year-old boy talking to himself in the language that children invent when the world is still new. Thomas Dominic Valenti was named for 2 men, his grandfather, who had died trying to do the right thing, and his father, who was learning to do the right thing from a cell in central Illinois. The boy had gray eyes, his mother's dark hair, a laugh that filled the apartment like weather. He did not yet understand why his father lived in a different building, or why visits happened in a room with plastic chairs and vending machines that dispensed stale candy bars. He only knew that the tall man with the white hair smiled when he saw him, and that the tall man's hands shook when he held him, and that the shaking stopped briefly when the boy put his small fingers around the tall man's thumb. Elena worked. Her design studio operated out of a shared workspace in Pilsen, 3 desks and a printer, and clients she had built 1 referral at a time. The income was modest, enough for rent, food, childcare, and a small savings account that grew slowly the way honest money always does. She did not receive support from Dominic's former organization. She did not ask for it. The distance between the woman she had been at the gala and the woman she was now could be measured in exactly the things she no longer needed from anyone else. She still flinched sometimes when a man raised his voice in a restaurant, when a car backfired on 18th Street, when Thomas threw a tantrum and she had to consciously remind herself that anger in a child was not the same as anger in a man, and that volume was not a precursor to violence. The architecture of fear that Ryan Cole had built inside her was crumbling, but slowly, the way old buildings come down, brick by brick, year by year. She visited Dominic once a month. The drive to Pekin took 3 hours. Thomas slept in his car seat while cornfields rolled past the window in an endless green arithmetic that made the world seem simpler than it was. At the facility, Dominic looked different, thinner. The silver in his hair had gone full white. The angles of his face had sharpened the way faces sharpen when excess is stripped away, and what remains is only the essential structure. But his eyes were clearer than she had ever seen them. The permanent tension that had lived behind his gaze since the night she met him, the coiled readiness of a man always bracing for the next threat, had loosened. Not disappeared. Loosened. The way a fist unclenches when it finally realizes there is nothing left to hold. He had been attending counseling, PTSD therapy that the VA had failed to provide, and the Bureau of Prisons, in one of its rare intersections with decency, offered. He talked about the Tangi Valley now, not in fragments at 3 a.m. on a penthouse terrace, but in structured sessions with a therapist who understood what combat does to the nervous system, and how men who survive it sometimes build entire worlds out of the wreckage, worlds that look like power but feel like falling. The tremor in his left hand was still there. It would always be there, but he had stopped hiding it. On this visit, a Thursday in October, Thomas brought a drawing, crayon on construction paper, 3 figures, a small one in the middle with gray circles for eyes, a taller one on the left with dark hair, a tallest one on the right with a white scribble on top of his head. "That is our house," Thomas said, pointing to a brown rectangle behind the figures. It had a triangle roof and a yellow sun, and what might have been a tree or might have been a giraffe. It did not matter. It was a house with 3 people in front of it, and that was enough. Dominic held the drawing with both hands. The tremor made the paper rattle softly. He looked at it for a long time. 2 more years, Elena said. He looked up. His eyes were wet. He did not try to conceal it. "I do not know if I will be ready," he said. "I do not know if I will be the man you need or the father he deserves. I know what I was and I know what I did, and some days the weight of it is so heavy I cannot get out of my bunk. That is honest. It is all I have left." She reached across the table, took his hand, felt the tremor against her palm. "I did not come here because I need you," she said. "I have a life, a business, a son who is healthy and loud and exactly right. I came because I chose to, and I will keep choosing until you give me a reason not to. That is not a promise. It is a fact, the same way you used to deliver facts. Remember?" He almost smiled. The ghost of the man he had been before everything went wrong flickered across his face and then settled into something new, something that looked like the beginning of a person who had not yet been built. "I remember." She stood, gathered Thomas, zipped his jacket. The boy waved at his father through the glass partition. Dominic waved back, drawing in his other hand, tremor visible, unmistakable, and entirely unbidden. Outside, the Illinois sky was the color of gunmetal. Elena buckled Thomas into his car seat, got behind the wheel, sat for a moment in the parking lot of a federal prison with her hands on the steering wheel and the engine running and the heater pushing warm air against her face. She thought about the gala, the black dress, the panic, the kiss that tasted like survival and changed everything. She thought about her father, Thomas Marchetti, the patient man with his spreadsheets and his puzzles and his belief that the truth was worth more than safety. She thought about Dominic, the soldier who lost his way, and the crime boss who found, at the very end, just enough of the man he used to be to walk through a door he could not walk back out of. She thought about the apartment in Pilsen, small, warm, paid for with her own work, the finger paintings on the refrigerator, the small shoes by the door, the life she had built with her own hands, on her own terms, without the permission or protection of any man. Then she put the car in drive and pulled out of the parking lot and drove 3 hours home through cornfields that stretched to the horizon under a sky that promised nothing except more sky. Behind her, in a room with fluorescent lights and plastic furniture, Dominic Valenti pinned his son's drawing to the wall of his cell beside the photograph of ODA 5131, 6 soldiers, 3 black crosses, and now a crayon house with 3 people standing in front of it, drawn by a boy with gray eyes who did not yet know the full story of how he came to be. He would learn it someday, all of it. The gala and the kiss and the debt and the dead man's evidence and the woman who refused to be saved and the soldier who saved himself by surrendering. He would learn about the Tangi Valley and the tremor and the people his father had hurt and the price that violence extracts from everyone it touches, not just the victims, but the ones who choose it. And when he learned it, he would have to decide. The same way his mother decided. The same way his father decided, too late, but not too late to matter. Whether to look away or to look straight ahead. Whether to choose what is safe or what is right. Whether to build a life in the shadows or step finally into the unforgiving and redemptive light. That is the end of this story, but it is not the end of theirs. Because the hardest battles are never the ones we fight with enemies. They are the ones we fight with ourselves. And those battles do not end with verdicts or sentences or the closing of prison doors. They end, if they end at all, in the quiet moments. A boy's drawing on a wall, a woman driving home through cornfields, a man sitting alone in a cell, hand trembling, looking at the faces of everyone he has loved and failed and trying, for the first time in a decade, to deserve the morning. End of the Shadow Covenant. I spent weeks writing this story, and I will be honest with you, the scene where Dominic faces Ghost on that terrace nearly broke me. 2 soldiers, 22 years of brotherhood, and one impossible choice between loyalty and saving his dying daughter. That is not fiction. That is the kind of decision real men carry to their graves. If you served, if you know someone who did, you understand what that silence costs. Tell me in the comments, what would you have done in Ghost's place? And if this story stayed with you, subscribe. The next one hits even harder.